My name is Elias Thorne, and I am the man they send to greet you at the end of the world. The sound of the Boeing C-17's engines winding down is a familiar death rattle. For the 8 souls on board, it's the last gasp of the world they knew. For me, standing on the plowed snow runway, it's just the start of another cycle. The air is a razor. At negative 30 degrees Celsius, it doesn't just feel cold, it feels solid, a physical presence that scrapes the warmth from your lungs. Our station, Outpost 0, sits at an altitude of nearly 800 meters, and the air is thin enough to make your thoughts feel slow and syrupy. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic sigh, vomiting a rectangle of warm, stale air into the pristine hostility of the Antarctic plateau. One by one, they descended, blinking against the brutal, featureless white that stretched to a horizon so clean it felt like a surgical cut. Antarctica is the world's largest ice desert, a fact people hear but cannot comprehend until they are standing in it, tiny, fragile speck of biology in a mineral wasteland. I assessed them as they huddled together, their brand new, brightly colored parkas, a pathetic defiance against the monochrome emptiness. They were the usual mix of scientific brilliance and support, staff, grit that keeps these places from collapsing. There was Lena, the doctor. Her face was calm, her eyes sharp and analytical, already taking in the environment, logging the data. She was a professional. She would be fine, at least for a while. Next to her, stamping his feet more for show than warmth, was Harris, the mechanic. Broad-shouldered, loud, with a beard that was already starting to collect frost. He was grinning, slapping a colleague on the back. He saw this as an adventure, a challenge to be wrestled into submission. His type was the most likely to break. And then there was Aris. Young, with the kind of sharp, intelligent features that broadcast a lifetime of being the smartest person in any room. An atmospheric scientist, one of the best in his field. They'd told me. He wasn't looking at the station or his new colleagues. He was staring out at the ice sheet, his expression one of profound, arrogant curiosity. He saw this place not as a danger, but as a problem to be solved, a system to be understood and mastered. He was the most dangerous of all. I let them have a moment to be overwhelmed before I stepped forward. "Welcome to Outpost 0, I said. My voice was flat, carrying easily in the thin, dry air. "I am Elias Thorne. I'm your indoctrination lead. Follow me. The tour is brief, and the rules are mandatory." I led them toward the station. Outpost 0 is an architectural marvel, a triumph of engineering designed to survive in a place nature never intended for life. It's a string of 8 modular pods, connected by articulated corridors and perched on massive hydraulic legs that allow us to climb out of the accumulating snow. It's a design heavily inspired by the British Halley VI station, the world's first fully relocatable research facility. 7 of the pods are a sterile, functional blue. The central, larger pod is a vibrant, almost violent red. From the air, it looks like a single drop of blood on a vast, white sheet, an artificial gash in the purity of the void. We entered through the airlock into the red module, the station's heart. The contrast was a deliberate psychological tool. Outside was an assault of wind, cold, and blinding light. Inside was a sanctuary engineered to counteract the psychological toll of isolation. The air was warm and smelled faintly of wood. The walls were lined with special cedar veneers, chosen because their natural scent provides a sensory link to a green world we would not see for a year. The layout was open plan, designed to encourage community and prevent the formation of the isolated cliques that can turn toxic in confinement. I had them shed their outer gear and gather in the communal area. "You'll get the full technical and safety briefing tomorrow," I began, my tone the same one I used for every rotation. Tonight is about the fundamentals, the core principles of life at zero. I started with the mundane, the rules that ground them in a reality they can understand. The work week is 54 hours, 9 hours a day, Monday through Saturday. Everyone pulls community duties. Waste management is absolute. Everything is sorted, compacted, and shipped back to the mainland. Nothing gets left behind. Water is our most precious resource. It's melted from a glacial reservoir deep beneath the station, a process that consumes enormous energy. Your showers are timed to 3 minutes. The toilets are a vacuum flush system like on an aircraft. They use 1 liter of water per flush, not 10. You will learn to appreciate this efficiency. Lena was taking notes in a small, waterproof notebook. Harris was listening with half an ear, his eyes scanning the architecture. Aris was watching me, a faint, skeptical frown on his lips. These are the station's operational protocols. I continued, my voice never changing inflection. Now for the station's survival protocols. You will commit these to memory. They are not negotiable. They are not open to interpretation. They are the reason we are still here. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over them. Rule 3. All reflections are to be considered unreliable. Do not stare into polished metal, helmet visors, still water, or the station windows after dark. If you observe a discrepancy in a reflection, movement where there is none, a shape that does not belong, you will turn away immediately and report it to me. Do not describe what you saw. Simply state the location and the rule number. Harris let out a short, disbelieving laugh. I ignored him. Rule 7. The daylight simulation lamp in your quarters is a piece of medical equipment designed to regulate your circadian rhythms and combat seasonal affective disorder during the polar night. It must remain active on its prescribed cycle at all times. Covering the lamp, disabling it, or otherwise interfering with its function is a level 1 breach of protocol. Rule 12. The station's ventilation system is a complex network. It produces a wide variety of acoustic signatures. If you believe you hear your name whispered from a ventilation shaft, you are mistaken. It is an auditory illusion caused by wind pressure and atmospheric density. Acknowledging the sound, verbally or otherwise, is a level 2 breach. The room was silent now. Harris's smirk was gone. Lena's pen had stopped moving. She was just staring at me. Rule 16. You will not build effigies. No snowmen, no human-like shapes from snow ice or any other material. This is a zero-tolerance protocol. I let the last rule hang in the air. The juxtaposition of such a bizarre command with the life or death seriousness of my delivery is designed to shock the system, to bypass intellectual skepticism and embed itself directly into the primal brain. It's a catechism of ice, and they must learn to recite it without question. It was Aris who spoke first, his voice calm and reasonable, which was far more dangerous than Harris's scoffing. Mr. Thorne, he said, I appreciate the need for psychological discipline in an environment like this, but with all due respect, some of these rules sound like institutionalized superstition. What is the scientific basis for Rule 3, for example? Are you suggesting a flaw in the laws of optics? I met his gaze. It's a critical moment, the first challenge to the established order. My response sets the tone for the entire year. The scientific basis, Dr. Aris, is a data set compiled from 8 prior expeditions and the operational histories of Holly V and Ether before that. It's a data set of incidents, disappearances, and catastrophic equipment failures, all correlated with breaches of these specific protocols. The why is irrelevant. The correlation is absolute. You are a scientist. Trust the data. Do not test the hypothesis. My answer left no room for debate. It reframed his scientific skepticism as unscientific recklessness. He held my gaze for a moment longer, his jaw tight, before giving a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The first battle was won, but I knew, with the weary certainty of long experience, that the war was just beginning. Your room assignments are on the board. Get settled. Dinner is at 1900 hours. Do not be late. They dispersed, their earlier excitement replaced by a quiet, unnerved tension. I watched them go, then began my own patrol, a slow circuit of the station's connecting corridors. The architecture was brilliant, but it was still just a machine, a fragile shell of warmth and order in an ocean of chaos. As I passed the corridor leading to the science modules, I saw him. Eris. He had stopped midway down the hall, standing before one of the massive, triple, glazed panoramic windows that looked out onto the endless ice. The 24-hour summer sun was low, casting long, distorted shadows. The outer pane of the window was coated in a fine layer of wind-scarred frost, but the inner panes were clear, creating a faint, layered reflection. He was staring at his own image. I stopped in the shadows of a connecting junction, watching. He was unaware of my presence. He leaned closer to the glass, so close his breath should have fogged it, but the station's powerful dehumidifiers kept the surface pristine. He tilted his head, a small, analytical motion, and then a faint, curious smile touched his lips. It was not a smile of vanity or pleasure. It was a smile of discovery, as if the faint, ghostly image looking back at him from the depths of the glass had just shown him something new, something interesting. He was testing the hypothesis already, and in the silent, sterile corridor of Outpost 0, I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. The first month passed in a blur of structured monotony. This was a critical phase, the settling. The initial shock of the continent, its scale, its hostility, its profound emptiness, gives way to the grinding reality of the work schedule. 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, anchored by the communal meals that were the bedrock of our social structure. In this engineered world, routine is the first line of defense against the psychological erosion of isolation. I watched them. It's the most important part of my job. I saw the subtle shifts as the continent worked its way under their skin. Harris, the mechanic, lost some of his boisterous swagger. The relentless wind that howled outside the workshop, a constant katabatic flow off the high plateau, seemed to score away his easy confidence. He became quieter, more focused on his work, the grin replaced by a tight, professional line. Lena, the doctor, was my baseline for normalcy. She established her clinic, ran the mandatory monthly health checks, and kept meticulous records. She'd started tracking sleep patterns and mood fluctuations across the crew, standard procedure for winter, over personnel who are prone to a host of psychological maladies, from anxiety to the full-blown winter over syndrome. She was a rock, and I found myself using my brief check-ins with her as a way to calibrate my own perceptions. And then there was Aris. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant success. The data flowing from his atmospheric sensors was pristine. He was mapping geospace phenomena with a clarity no one had achieved before, taking full advantage of our position in the auroral zone. He was courteous, efficient, and intellectually generous in the daily briefings. He was also, I knew, a liar. I never saw him stare at a window again. He was too smart for that. Instead, his experiments with Rule 3 became more subtle. I'd see him in the galley, polishing the back of a spoon with a napkin, his eyes focused on the distorted reflection for a fraction of a second too long. In the comms room, he'd angle a blank monitor screen just so, catching his own image in the dark glass while pretending to read a technical manual. He was gathering data, treating our survival protocol like a quaint native custom. He was indulging while secretly analyzing its foundational superstitions. He was a cancer of curiosity, and I had no way to cut him out without proof. The first real tremor came on a Tuesday, 5 weeks in. I was in my office, reviewing power consumption logs, a task of infinite boredom that is nonetheless critical to our survival, when Harris appeared at my door. "Got a minute, Ely?" he asked. He'd dropped the formal thorn a week ago. Always. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His face was pale under his tan, and the usual grease stains on his hands seemed like dark bruises. "It's probably nothing," he started, the classic preamble to something that is definitely not nothing. "The wind. It does weird things in the vents." "You said so yourself." "I did," I confirmed, my posture not changing.
Yeah, well,
I was in the main workshop under the primary air handler, and I heard something. He wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on a schematic of the station's water reclamation system on my wall. Sounded like my name. Harris. Just once, real quiet. "Auditory illusion," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Pareidolia. The brain creates patterns from random noise, wind pressure, atmospheric density. Rule 12. "Right. Yeah, auditory illusion." He nodded, but the motion was jerky, unconvinced. "Thing is, Illy, it sounded like my daughter." I felt a knot tighten in my gut. This was new. The whispers were usually indistinct, just a sibilant breath that could be mistaken for a name. For it to mimic a specific, beloved voice was a dangerous escalation. "The human mind is a powerful thing, Harris," I said, keeping my voice level. "In an environment with this level of sensory deprivation, it latches onto familiar things. It's a known symptom of prolonged isolation. You miss your family. Your brain is filling in the gaps." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading for reassurance. "So I just ignore it." "You do more than ignore it. You do not acknowledge it. You do not wait for it to happen again. You do not mention it to anyone else. You put it out of your mind and you get back to work. That is the protocol. It exists for a reason." He swallowed hard and nodded again, this time with more conviction. "Right. Protocol. Got it." He left, and I watched him walk down the corridor, his shoulders hunched. I made a note in my private log. Harris. Vent. Auditory hallucination. Specific. Monitor closely. The incident unsettled the station's fragile equilibrium, at least for me. I started noticing things. The way people would pause for a moment too long in the corridors, tilting their heads as if listening for a sound they couldn't quite place. The slight increase in prescriptions for sleep, aids that Lena mentioned in our next check-in. The station was breathing, and we were the microbes living in its lungs. My attention, however, remained fixed on Aris. His intellectual arrogance was a far greater threat than a mechanic's momentary fear. A week after Harris's visit, I found what I was looking for. Aris's lab was at the far end of the Blue Science module, a space filled with humming racks of equipment and displays showing elegant swirls of atmospheric data. He was meticulous, but I had a master key and a reason. I went in when he was on his mandatory recreation hour in the gym. Taped to the side of a spectrometer, almost completely hidden from casual view, was a small, perfectly polished square of beryllium, no bigger than a thumbnail. It was angled toward his primary workstation. It was a mirror. A purpose-built, scientifically calibrated mirror. He wasn't just glancing at incidental reflections anymore. He was conducting a formal experiment. I didn't remove it. That would be a declaration of war. Instead, I waited. I found him that evening in the red module's social area, reading a book. The large, open, planned space was designed to prevent clicks, but it also meant there were few places for a private conversation. "Perfect, Dr. Aris," I said, standing over him. He looked up, his expression one of mild, academic inquiry. "Elias, is there a problem?" "The beryllium sample on your spectrometer. It's not standard equipment." His composure didn't slip, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, but annoyance. The irritation of a grandmaster whose opponent has stumbled upon his strategy by accident. "It's for a calibration test," he said smoothly. "I'm checking for minute vibrations in the housing. The laser reflection from a polished surface is a simple way to detect microtremors." It was a plausible lie. A brilliant one, even. But it was a lie. All structural and environmental monitoring is routed through my office, Aris. If you have a concern about vibration, you bring it to me. You do not conduct your own freelance diagnostics, and you certainly don't do it using a mirror in direct violation of a primary survival protocol. He closed his book, marking his page with his finger. "With all due respect, the rule is about not staring into reflections. It's a psychological directive to prevent obsessive behavior in a closed environment. I am using a tool for a scientific purpose. I am observing refracted light, not my own face. You are splitting hairs to justify breaking a rule you don't understand," I said, my voice dropping lower. "You think these are suggestions? They are not. They are the sutures holding this place together. And you are pulling at the threads. Or perhaps," he countered, his voice sharp with intellectual condescension, "I am trying to understand the underlying phenomena that led to these superstitions in the first place. What if unreliable reflections are not a psychological issue, but a physical one? A localized warping of space-time, perhaps, or a quantum entanglement effect unique to the polar geospace. Isn't it our duty as scientists to investigate, not to blindly obey?" His arrogance was breathtaking. He was framing his recklessness as a noble pursuit of knowledge. He was willing to risk all our lives for a footnote in one of his papers. Before I could respond, the lights in the station flickered. Once, twice, then they died completely, plunging the vast red module into absolute, terrifying darkness. The only light was the faint, ghostly emergency strip lighting along the floor. The hum of the life support systems, the constant background noise of our existence, fell silent. A collective gasp went through the room. In the sudden, profound silence, another sound became audible. A soft, wet, scraping noise. It was coming from the panoramic window that lined the far wall. A window that was now a perfect 50-foot wide black mirror. And in that mirror, illuminated only by the faint green floor lights, something was moving. It wasn't a reflection of anyone in the room. It was tall and thin, and it was crawling on the other side of the glass. For a frozen second that stretched into an eternity, there was only the sound. A slick, dragging scrape against the outer pane of the window. My training, hammered into my psyche over 8 deployments, took over. My own fear was a distant, clinical thing. The panic in the room was the immediate threat. "Rule 3!" My voice was a gunshot in the dark. "Look away from the window! Eyes on me! Now!" A few people screamed. Someone stumbled and fell. But my command, devoid of panic and filled with absolute authority, cut through the terror. I heard the shuffle of feet, the averted gazes. I didn't turn. I kept my back to the window, my eyes scanning the terrified faces of the crew, illuminated in the ghostly green emergency lighting. I saw Harris, his face a mask of primal horror. I saw Lena, her professional calm shattered, her hand clamped over her mouth. And I saw Aris. He was the last to turn away. His face was slack, his intellectual arrogance sandblasted away by a single, Impossible observation. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray pallor. He had seen it. He had looked right at it. He had tested the hypothesis, and the results were in. An eternity later. In reality, perhaps 15 seconds, the emergency generators coughed to life with a deep, guttural roar. The main lights flickered on, flooding the red module with a harsh, sterile brilliance. The sudden light was as shocking as the darkness had been. I turned slowly. The window was empty. Outside, there was only the endless, indifferent white of the ice sheet under the low-hanging sun. The scraping sound was gone. There was nothing. No tracks. No disturbance in the wind-packed snow. Nothing. System reboot. I announced, my voice still flat, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my stomach. A coronal mass ejection likely triggered a cascade failure in the primary power grid. The backup is stable. Harris, with me. We'll run a diagnostic. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. A plausible, scientific lie to paper over the gaping wound that had just been torn in our reality. People need explanations. They need order. The truth was not something they could handle. The truth was that the station's safety systems had not failed. They had been bypassed. Harris followed me like a sleepwalker as I moved toward the engineering hub. Lena intercepted us. Wyas, what was that? People are terrified. We need to talk about what just happened. We will, I said, not breaking my stride. At the 08,000 briefing. For now, everyone returns to their quarters. The station is secure. That's the official word. And the unofficial one? She pressed, her voice low. I stopped and looked at her. For the first time, I let a sliver of the truth show in my eyes. The unofficial word. Doctor, is that one of your colleagues has been conducting unauthorized experiments, and he got a result. I left her standing there and proceeded with Harris to the power control room. The logs were a mess of corrupted data, but the core truth was clear. It wasn't a surge from outside that caused the blackout. It was a drain from inside. A massive, instantaneous power draw that had shorted out the primary conduits. Something had fed on our station's energy. The fragile sense of community, so carefully engineered with open plan layouts and cedar, scented walls, shattered overnight. Fear is a solvent for civilization. The crew retreated into themselves. Meals in the galley became tense, silent affairs. People avoided the panoramic windows, walking in the center of the corridors, their eyes down. The station, once a marvel of engineering, now felt like a tomb. The psychological hibernation that researchers sometimes enter to cope with the isolation had been replaced by a state of vigilant dread. The whispers from the vents grew more frequent. 2 more crew members reported hearing their names, this time not as faint illusions, but as sharp, clear sounds. I gave them the same protocol-driven dismissal, but the words felt hollow. The line between psychological stress and external phenomena had blurred into non-existence. My primary concern was Eris. He had locked himself in his lab. When I used my master key, I found him not in a state of catatonia, but a frantic, obsessive work. The small beryllium mirror lay in a corner, shattered, its polished surface now a spider web of fractures. Eris was surrounded by his monitors, but the elegant displays of atmospheric data were gone. Instead, the screens were filled with raw static, endless fields of digital noise from his most sensitive instruments. It's not in the signal, Elias, he whispered, not looking at me. His eyes were red, rimmed, his face illuminated by the flickering screens. I've been looking for it in the signal for weeks. A particle, an energy wave, something to explain the anomalies. But I was wrong. It's not in the signal. He pointed a trembling finger at a screen filled with what looked like television snow. It's in the noise, the gaps. The spaces between the data points, there's a pattern, a geometry. It's not random. His scientific curiosity had metastasized into a terrified obsession. He had poked the abyss, and now he was desperately trying to map its contours. He was broken, and a broken man in a place like this is a liability of the highest order. Shut it down, Aris, I ordered. No, I'm close to something, he hissed, turning to face me, his eyes wild. Don't you see? The reflections weren't the cause. They were the medium! A way of focusing attention, of establishing a connection. It learns through observation. My observation! He was right. I knew he was right. But admitting it would be to admit that the situation was beyond my control. You are relieved of your duties, I said, my voice cold. You are confined to your quarters. Lena will be by to see you. He just laughed, a high, unhinged sound that echoed in the sterile lab. You can't stop it now. The door's been opened. I left him there, sealing the lab behind me. The situation was deteriorating faster than any I had ever experienced. The rules were failing because they were predicated on a degree of compliance that fear had eroded. I felt like a man trying to patch a collapsing dam with his bare hands. 3 days later, with the polar night now fully upon us, plunging us into 24-hour darkness, the final protocol was breached. I was doing a perimeter check on the station's exterior sensor arrays, a routine I performed myself. The wind was a physical blow, the cold so intense it felt like fire. In the powerful beam of my headlamp, the station behind me was a fragile island of light and warmth in a sea of blackness and ice. About 100 meters from the station, my beam caught something, a shape. It was where no shape should be. I approached cautiously, my ice axe held ready. It was a figure, roughly human-sized, standing alone on the ice sheet. My first thought was that someone had gone outside, a catastrophic breach of safety. But as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a person. It was an effigy. It was in compliance with the letter of Rule 16, but not its spirit. It wasn't made of snow. It was sculpted from pure, black ice. The surface was impossibly smooth, like polished obsidian, and it seemed to drink the light from my headlamp. It had no features, no face, no limbs, but the shape was unmistakably, unnervingly humanoid. It looked less like it was built and more like it had been extruded from the ice sheet itself. The ice it was made of was different from the surrounding snow and fern. It was dark, clear, as if drawn from the ancient subglacial water deep below. I stood before it, the wind howling around me, trying to process the sheer impossibility of the thing. Who could have made this? When? And with what tools? Then, a cold realization washed over me, a cold that had nothing to do with the 60-degree air. I turned, tracing a line of sight from the effigy back to the station. The black ice figure was positioned perfectly, unerringly, in front of the single panoramic window of the blue science module. It was standing directly in front of Aris's lab. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was an answer, a response in a conversation I didn't understand. The hypothesis had been tested, the connection had been made, and now, out in the endless dark, something was patiently waiting, and it was learning our shape. The walk back to the station was the longest of my life. The wind tore at me, a physical manifestation of the chaos that had been unleashed, but the cold in my bones was from a source far deeper than the polar atmosphere. The effigy was not just a breach of protocol, it was a declaration. A line had been crossed, not by us, but for us. I didn't bother with stealth. I strode through the silent corridors, my heavy boots echoing like drumbeats of doom. The few crew members I passed shrank away from the look on my face. I went straight to the science module and keyed open Aris's lab. The scene inside was worse than I had imagined. Aris hadn't slept. His eyes were blazing with a feverish, ecstatic light. The screens no longer showed random static. They displayed intricate, shifting geometric patterns, nightmarish mandalas of impossible angles and self-folding dimensions. It was the geometry of a seizure, the architecture of madness. "Look, Elias!" he breathed, his voice hoarse with discovery. He pointed to the largest screen, where a complex, spidery shape was slowly rotating. "It's beautiful, isn't it? It's not just noise. It's a language, a consciousness defined by absence. It exists in the spaces our reality doesn't fill." "The effigy, Aris," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did you see it?" A beatific smile spread across his face. "It saw me. It's a gift. A self-portrait. It's showing me what it looks like. It's learning our concept of form, of self. It's trying to relate." "It's a predator, Aris! A mimic! And you've laid out a welcome mat and taught it our name!" "You're still thinking in terms of biology," he scoffed, his arrogance returning, twisted into a new, messianic form of predator and prey. "This is something else entirely. This is contact." As he spoke, the lights in the lab began to pulse in time with the rotating geometry on the screen. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sound that felt like it was resonating directly with my bones. "What have you done?" I demanded, grabbing the front of his jumpsuit. "I've answered," he whispered, his eyes locked on the screen. "I've let it know we're listening." Then all hell broke loose. It started not with a bang, but with a sound. From the station's ventilation system, the whispers returned. But they were no longer whispers. They were a chorus. Every crew member's name, spoken in the voices of their most loved and most feared. I heard my own name in my father's disappointed tone, a ghost I hadn't confronted in 20 years. From down the hall, a scream confirmed others were hearing their own private demons. The main power grid didn't just fail, it was devoured. The darkness that fell was absolute, a physical pressure. The emergency lights didn't even try to come on. The hum intensified, and with it came the scraping. It was everywhere. From the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. It was the sound of something impossibly large, dragging itself through the station's superstructure, through the very bones of our sanctuary. The triple, glazed window in Aris's lab began to craze, not from an impact, but from an internal pressure. The layers of glass separated, and between them, a dark, oily liquid seemed to weep into the vacuum, freezing into fractal patterns of black ice. I knew then that the rules were dead. The catechism of ice was a prayer against a god that had now arrived. There was only one protocol left: survival. I grabbed the emergency flare kit from the wall mount and ignited one. The brilliant, chemical red light filled the room, casting our shadows long and monstrous. In the flare's glare, the patterns on the screens writhed. Aris stared, mesmerized. "It's here," he breathed. "It's anchored to you, Aris," I snarled, dragging him away from the monitors. "You're the connection. We have to break it." He fought me, a surprising strength in his wary frame. "No, you'll ruin it." "This is the greatest discovery in human history." The corridor outside the lab was a nightmare. The walls seemed to bend, the perspective shifting like a broken lens. The cedar panels, meant to soothe our minds with the scent of home, were splintering, weeping a black, sap-like substance. The very architecture of the station, designed to promote psychological well-being, was being weaponized against us. I dragged Aris through the chaos, toward the main airlock in the central red module. The scraping sound was closer now, coalescing just behind us. I didn't dare look back. I knew I wouldn't see a monster of flesh and blood. I would see the station itself twisting into a new, malevolent geometry, the shape from Aris's screen given physical form. We burst into the red module. The rest of the crew were huddled together, screaming, their minds broken by the auditory assault. Harris was on his knees, clawing at his ears, sobbing his daughter's name. I shoved Aris toward the outer airlock door. You wanted to meet it so badly. I roared over the cacophony. Here's your chance! His eyes widened in sudden, final understanding. The scientist in him died, and the terrified man was born. No, Elias! Please! I was wrong! Don't. My hand was on the emergency release. This was not in any manual. This was not a protocol. This was a choice born of desperation. To sacrifice one to save the rest. To commit murder to prevent an extinction. But I couldn't do it. Not like this. Instead, I shoved him into the airlock chamber and hit the cycle button. The inner door hissed shut, sealing him inside. The scraping sound outside the door intensified, clawing at the metal. What are you doing? Lena screamed at me. Severing the connection! I yelled back. I looked through the small porthole in the inner door. Aris was pounding on the outer door, his face a mask of pure terror. Through the thick glass, I could see the outer door's surface beginning to frost over in those same black, fractal patterns. The station's main power conduit ran directly beneath the airlock module. It was a desperate gamble, a hypothesis of my own. I smashed the glass on the fire control panel, grabbing the heavy axe. With a scream of rage and terror, I brought it down on the main power conduit access plate. Sparks flew. I struck it again and again, the impacts jarring my entire body. The metal groaned, then tore open. Inside, the station's lifeblood pulsed. A thick, shielded cable carrying all the power from the generators. The scraping on the airlock door was frantic now. The metal was beginning to buckle inward. I raised the axe one last time and brought it down on the cable itself. The world ended in a flash of blue, white light, and a sound that was the opposite of silence. The energy discharge threw me across the room. The station's remaining systems died with a final, agonizing groan. The scraping stopped. The chorus of voices fell silent. All that remained was the howl of the wind outside and the darkness. The official report cites a catastrophic failure of the primary power conduit, triggering a fire and a full station blackout. Dr. Aris, trapped in the airlock during the event, died of asphyxiation before he could be reached. A tragedy, an accident. The 7 of us who survived were evacuated at the first possible light, months later. We never spoke of what really happened. There were no words for it. We were a crew of ghosts, haunted by the geometry of fear. I am the only one who returned to the ice. They say it's a sign of my resilience, my dedication. They don't understand. I didn't come back for them. I came back for it. I stand at the panoramic window of the newly rebuilt Outpost 0, looking out at the endless, pristine white. The new recruits are due to arrive tomorrow. I have their files. I have my speech, and I have a new unwritten rule, one that will never be in any official manual. Rule 0, Antarctica is not empty. It is listening. Do not speak to it. Do not look for patterns in the noise. Do not, under any circumstances, let it know you are here. Because I can feel it, sometimes in the quiet moments. A faint vibration in the ice beneath my feet. It's waiting. It's patient. And it remembers its shape.